Okay then, team preview number 18. It's time for us to head back over to the West region. We're done with the East region after the Shanghai Dragons last time around, and now we are moving back to the West, and we're going to take a look and go to Canada for our next two, actually. And this will be the Canadian doubleheader that we always have, starting off with the Toronto Defiant. So Toronto Defiant, they are a team that, you know, they're kind of up and down, right? They were one of our second group of teams to come in 2019. They finished 17th in 2019, which is not a massively great placing. And then in 2020, they kind of went up 2 places and finished 15th, which again is not massively great. Toronto had a good meta during 2020, where they actually picked up a few wins. It was during the Genji meta, where they had agilities that could do really well in that sort of meta, but they were very much a meta one trick, and therefore they weren't able to make those results consistent, and that's what let down the Toronto Defiant last season. So it's a very different looking Toronto Defiant for 2021, and they will be better. I would be incredibly surprised if they finish where they were last in the previous 2 seasons. Like, that would be a massive underachievement for the squad. And furthermore, I actually think this is one of the most promising Toronto Defiant squads we've had yet, and is possibly one of the most promising squads we're going to see this season in terms of its possible quality. And I mean a very big possible, because yes, there's a lot of quality on this roster, but will it realize its potential? We just don't know. We never really know. So yeah, Toronto could be a dark horse, or they could be just meh, you know, much like Archives 2021. Anyway, let's not get into that. Let's take a look at the Toronto Defiant, shall we? So they've let quite a few people go. They let their interim head coach OWLRU go. They let Mangachu go, who was a DPS coach. They also let Allbless, their interim general manager, assistant coach, go. They let Baroy go, who was their assistant coach and analyst. He's now moved over to the Boston Uprising as an assistant coach. I'm not sure how he's going to come up with visa issues, because I know there are a few visa issues, but hopefully he's still in NA already, so that's not going to be too much of an issue for Boston Uprising. Anyway, this is not about Boston. Moving on, and then they let go of Glitch at the start of this year as an assistant coach, and he retired. So this means that we see a massive shake-up for the Toronto Defiant. And in their back room, this means an entirely new coaching staff. They bring in as head coach KDG. KDG was head coach of the Philadelphia Fusion last year. They had an incredibly good regular season, but when it came to the playoffs, they completely fell with a whimper. And that's an issue. And yeah, I mean, hopefully that's a Philadelphia Fusion thing, not a KDG thing, right? Philadelphia Fusion, sorry Philly fans, you're known for falling at the last hurdle. So hopefully that's a thing that doesn't transfer to the Toronto Defiant, but I think that's a good head coach addition. And then we have Yang Wang coming in as assistant coach, and we have Ho Chi Lee coming in as assistant coach as well. So there is a massive overhaul of the coaching staff of Toronto Defiant, and I think that's going to be very interesting to see how that does. I think it's a better coaching staff, and I'm hoping it will get a lot of joy out of this new Toronto roster, because I think it's a roster that could do quite well. It's just, will it do well? I don't trust it to do well. That's the problem. So the 2020 roster, we'll get there in a minute, don't worry, is basically pretty much all gone. And I don't think that's too much of a surprise. So we saw Nevix go, Zik also left, Cruz has left, he's now at Young and Beautiful in the EU Contenders. Agilities has left, he unfortunately went to the Valiant, and then, yeah, well, that happened. The Numlock's left, I think he's now retired actually, he went over to Young and Beautiful originally, but I think he's now retired. Surefor, he's left, I think he's moved over to Sentinels, as a streamer, or is he a Valorant? I can't remember which one now. Beast, he moved out, we'll talk about him in a minute. Mangachu obviously left. Roki, he left, went over to T1 as staff over there, and then Kareev left, and he's the only one who actually found another Overwatch League team, because he's now at the Guangzhou Charge, who we've looked at already, and yeah, I think that's a good pickup for the Charge. But in terms of flex support, I think Toronto Defiant have actually gone and nabbed themselves someone better, but there we go. Let's look at this new look Toronto Defiant then, because I like the roster. I'm not gonna lie, I like the roster. I'm not sure if it's gonna have the potential that some other rosters have got, the newer rosters anyway, but it is a really nice roster. And I think it could surprise a few people. The first thing that surprised me about it is the fact that they held on to Logix. He's the only, technically the only surviving member of the older Toronto Defiant squad. I just combined Toronto and Defiant to Defiant. Okay. So that's an interesting one. I don't think Logix is going to be the starting DPS by any means for this Toronto Defiant squad. I don't know why they would start him over the other DPS they have, unless it was a very specific meta pick. But I think Logix is very good to have in the back pocket. I still think he's got a lot of quality, and Logix has been dealt somewhat of a difficult blow in the Overwatch League. He's been on quite a few iffy teams, so being on an actual good team, Logix might show some really good quality that he used to have back in the pre-OWL days. So yeah, I'm not too worried about Logix being on this roster. Then we have the funny one, because this is Beast. Yes, I know, I just said Beast had left, and now he's back again. For some reason, Toronto Defiant let go of Beast, and then we're like, okay, let's re-sign Beast. I really don't understand why, but I guess it's a thing. I can almost certainly say that Beast will not start for this team, not with the other main tank they have. It's just a really weird thing that happened, and yeah, I mean, I guess, great, I guess, Toronto? I don't know. So then we move on to the incomers for Toronto Defiant, and the first up will be a flex support. This is Aztec. So Aztec, he is someone I saw play for WGS Phoenix in the Season 2 Korea Finals of last year, and he went up against Runaway and he tore them apart. And it was actually a really crazy and good performance from Aztec, and he really impressed me with that. So I think this is a really good pickup from WGS Phoenix, although he was on loan from Uprising Academy, which is a bit of a shot in the foot from Uprising, but there we go, you know, that's what happens sometimes. But I like this pickup. It's debatable whether he'll be the flex support of choice for the Toronto Defiant, but I still really like the pickup. And he's going to be partnered, possibly, with Anson J, who comes in from Element Mystic to be the main support for Toronto Defiant in 2021. And again, Anson J may not have been the best main support in Korea last year, but he was a good one. And I think he'll be a very good partnership to put with these two flex supports that Toronto Defiant have got. So I like it. I like the support line for the Toronto Defiant. I have since it's been announced, even before the second flex support pickup. So I think there is a lot of potential in this support line, which is very good news for the Toronto Defiant. Now we move on to the main tank of choice for Toronto, almost certainly of a Beast. Like, if Sado does not, you know, be picked over Beast, that would be quite a revelation. Sado comes in from the Philadelphia Fusion. He had a good season, regular season-wise, for Philadelphia Fusion last season, and it kind of went south during the playoffs, but the whole of the Fusion kind of went south during the playoffs, so, you know, we don't know what we can say about that, along with KDG. So, yeah, Sado, I like it. He was one of the best main tanks around last year. Will he be consistent? Like, the year before, he wasn't great, so you don't know which Sado you're going to get, but I still think it's a good main tank, and it's going to be better than Beast, that's for sure. So, I like the pickup, and yeah, they might live or die by Sado in some respects, which means that you can't rate Toronto too highly, but I do still think they've got a really nice roster. Also coming in from the Philadelphia Fusion, we see Hisu follow KDG. So Hisu, in my opinion, was quite a loss for Philly, because of him being like a challenge, not challenger to Carpe, but another option compared to Carpe, and them being not so reliant on Carpe, but they've kind of lost him now, and he's followed his way to Toronto Defiant. Hisu was not the best DPS player around last year, but I still think he will be a good DPS player. And he will be challenged by Logix, which I think is also good. I think Hisu does need someone to challenge him, which I think is going to be great for Toronto. And I keep saying it, but I do like the roster. I just don't know whether it's going to fulfill its potential. And that's the annoying thing when I look at this roster. For the off-tank, they're bringing in Michelle. There is no other option to Michelle on this roster, so he will be the starting off-tank of choice. And it's, again, a debatable one, because Michelle was kind of permabenched on Salt Dynasty last year. And he was permabenched for what was traditionally a main tank in Marvel. So what Salt did was a little bit freaky, I suppose, but Michelle didn't really get, like, the most time to show how much he could do, and then 2U came in, so he was kind of like definitely permabenched by that point. So with Michelle coming in, it's a gamble for Toronto. It's not going to be, I don't think Michelle is going to be one of the best off tanks in the league. I don't think he's going to be able to compete with the likes of Choi Hyobin and Void and people like that. But Michelle, I think, will be nicely consistent. But I do think he could possibly be a weak point for this Defiant squad as well. So it's slightly worrying in that respect, but I'm willing to give it the benefit of the doubt in this respect. But he's not going to be able, you're not going to be able to put this Toronto Defiant roster in the same namesake as, say, Washington Justice, because the rosters don't compare at this point. Like, there's not enough quality Toronto-wise to beat Washington, in my opinion. But, you know, that's just my sort of opinion on things. Another new incomer is the Flex DPS. This is Neist. So Neist comes in from the T1 roster in Korea. Neist, again, he's okay. He was part of the Philadelphia Fusion University, the Fusion University, I should say, who were really good back in the day. And he had obviously great success with that roster because that roster just had success. It was a success-ridden roster. But moving over to T1, it's kind of gone downhill since then, but is that Neist's fault? Maybe not. It is a big step for him to go out to the Overwatch League with the Toronto Defiant, and it'll be interesting to see if he can keep up with the other Flex DPSs in the league. I don't know whether it will work. We'll have to wait and see. That is a big thing with Neist, that we'll just have to wait and see what happens with Neist. We really, really will. But he does have a really nice flexible hero pool. And Toronto have 2 Sombra players, so that's something they could pull out of the bag, especially in NA, which won't play too much Sombra. And then the last one we have in there is the other flex support. This is Lastro coming in from the Valiant. So obviously Valiant blew up and they got rid of their roster and included Lastro. Lastro deserves a spot in the Overwatch League because he was a fantastic flex support last year, and he's coming in and going to be part of Toronto Defiant. So then you've got to weigh up, do we play Aztac or Lastro? And that's a really, really difficult decision. Aztac, yes, he doesn't have Overwatch League experience, but he was cracked in Korea at the end of last year. But Lastro has really great Overwatch League experience and was great for Valiant last year at the Overwatch League level. So I think Toronto might start with Lastro, but I think it might also be slightly meta dependent on how Toronto Defiant want to play. I got there in the end. So yeah, I'm a little bit surprised that they picked up Lastro actually. I thought he might end up going to a different team, but yeah, it's still adding incredible depth to the Toronto Defiant roster, which I like. I like a lot. Like, the supports, I think, are the best part of this roster. It's a really nice support line. And that's the basis of a lot of rosters in the Overwatch League, if you hadn't noticed. So that rounds us out for the roster of Toronto Defiant, but now let's take a look at their up-and-coming matches, the first 6 matches of the season, and, well, it's going to be interesting because Toronto kind of eased their way into the season slightly. So they start off with the battle for Canada, so they go up against Vancouver Titans. It's funny because the Titans sort of turned on their head back when Vancouver were all Korean and Toronto was mixed, and now Toronto's kind of all Korean and now Vancouver's mixed. It's weird. Anyway, Vancouver are probably going to be one of the worst teams in the league this season. I'd be very surprised if they weren't. So I would expect a team like Toronto to beat them. I mean, upsets can happen. We've seen it happen before, right? But if Toronto were to lose to Vancouver, that would be a massive upset, even this early on in the season, so I'd expect Toronto to win that, and hopefully Toronto will get a pretty one-sided victory there as well. Like, they really want to start off the season making a statement, I would say. And then, into Atlanta Reign. Well, this is where things might get a little bit more sticky, perhaps, for Toronto, because Atlanta have got really good DPS, but they don't really have what else do they have to kind of match the Toronto Defiant roster. Like, I think the Toronto supports are better. I think the Toronto tanks are better. So, all in all, I think Toronto is a better team, but it wouldn't be out of the realms of possibility of the Atlanta Reign DPS carry them to a win over Toronto. That could happen. But I would look at it on paper, and if I'm going to look at it on paper, I'm going to say a Toronto win. But I think Atlanta could cause Toronto significant issues. Then we move over to Toronto versus Washington. Now, I kind of half alluded to this earlier, but I think Washington have got too much quality for Toronto. We'll be looking at Washington obviously very soon. It'll be the last one of these previews, and I think, and a lot of people will probably agree, that this Washington roster is very, very good. And I think it's just got that little bit more. Like, the tank line for Washington completely outweighs Toronto, and so do the DPS for Washington, in my opinion, as well. So then it leaves sort of leaves it to the supports, and yeah, maybe the supports are a tiny bit better in Toronto, but they're not going to carry Toronto to a win over Washington. I'd extremely doubt that. So yeah, I would go for Washington win there, and then Toronto have London in the fourth match of the season. Again, London, similar to Atlanta, could cause Toronto issues. If Toronto want to be put in the same hat as the likes of Florida Mayhem and Washington, then they have to be sweeping like the likes of London and Vancouver and Atlanta. They need to be sweeping them. It can be close. And I worry with Toronto that it might be close. So it's a lot of speculation around this Toronto roster, because there are a few rosters in the league where you don't know how they're going to perform when they really get into it. Seoul is another one. And Toronto reminds me of one of those rosters. Like, it could be like Philly of last year and pop off big time, or it could be just meh. I keep using that word at the moment, but like, it could just be meh. And that would be an actual real shame, considering the quality on this Toronto roster. They're one of the few teams to have invested this season. Then after the main melee, we go into the June Joust. This will be hero pools, so again, that could have a very big impact on what we see. But first of all, they'll play Paris Eternal. That should be a easier prospect than London. I think London are more well-rounded than the Paris Eternal, but I think they should still sweep the Paris Eternal if they want to be really, contesting up there. But they should at least get a win. Like, it shouldn't be close though. Like, Toronto need to be really kind of smacking them. And then this is an interesting one. Toronto versus Boston in the sixth match of the season. So, Boston have just lost soon. That's not too much of a loss, in my opinion. But, looking at Boston in the next cup and the way they got dismantled by Gladiators and then kind of got caused a lot of issues by Paris. I think Toronto take that. I really do. And it's a shame in some respects, because I think the Boston Uprising roster isn't bad. It's not the complete package yet, but I don't think it's a bad roster. And I think it's a roster capable of beating this Toronto Defiant one, but I don't think it will defeat this Toronto Defiant one. But we look at the Boston Uprising roster, and it's really good on paper, but I think Boston might underachieve with that roster, which is sad in a lot of respects. But it's just kind of what you expect of Boston these days. Some of the stuff just doesn't add up. So I think Toronto would get a win over Boston. I think they'll just be more well-rounded and better coaching at Toronto as well. So yeah, much more experienced. And that's where we leave with that. So, I mean, there is the possibility that Toronto goes 6-0. I think it's very doubtful considering the game against Washington. I think, however, a 5-1 start to the season for Toronto is very doable. With wins against Vancouver, Atlanta, London, Paris, and Boston. I think that is very, very doable for for Toronto. So, yeah, I think there are glimmers of hope and signs of promise for Toronto Defiant. I think that's the way we can look at it. And let's be honest, like, they've got much more in terms of promise than the other Canadian team have, and that was a lovely segue, if I do say so myself, because the next one is going to be about Vancouver Titans. Vancouver. Well, that's a team that's had a history, isn't it? But that's for the next one, and then after that, Washington, and that will be it for the team previews before the Overwatch League, and we will talk about power rankings and things like that. But stick with it, hit the bell and everything, subscribe and all that for these team previews, and then obviously everything that comes after that. But I am going to leave it here for now. All the socials are linked in the video description for Illusion Gaming and myself. But for now, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you'd like to give a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next video. See you then.